Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. In our last segment here, looking forward to this left forum. One of the speakers will be Oliver Stone and his historian sidekick, a guy called Kutznick from American University. And we've just been looking at this Untold story, the series from Showtime Television. There are some positive features. It is good to highlight the heroism of the Soviet Union in World War II. We would always say here that the defense of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany is the greatest military achievement in human history, and the gratitude of the American people to the Soviets, Russian people, is eternal, and we honor it right now. And we honor it in the dealings with somebody like Putin. I wonder if Kutznick does. I'm not sure that he does. In any case, to go beyond this to adulation actually detracts from the authority of the overall argument. It simply will not do to say, oh, the Hitler-Stalin pact, the crushing of Hungary, the Prague coup, the Berlin blockade, the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of these, somehow we can understand the Soviets and why they did it. I would even add the 1983 nuclear alert, right, which got us close to World War III. At the same time, it's good to highlight somebody like Henry Wallace and the role of Sidney Hillman and Philip Murray. At the same time, we have to ask, how was this defeated? Did Wallace make mistakes? And in particular, what was the role of British intelligence in this? And this, I guess, puts us right to one of the principal problems of this. The overall series is deeply disappointing, and I'm not blaming Oliver Stone. He's a movie maker. I'm blaming Kutznick. So afraid of being a conspiracy theorist that what he gives you is essentially the establishment version of history with the signs inverted. It's typical of people who are in the kind of William Appleman Williams or even Howard Zinn traditions that this should be so. What is missing in this is the heroism of Franklin D. Roosevelt. The overall series pays very little attention to domestic policy. Therefore, the radicalism and the heroism of the New Deal is hardly included. And what is left out? There's nothing about the attempt to assassinate Roosevelt in 1933 in Florida. There's nothing about the 1934 to 35 Morgan coup. There is nothing about the 1937 planned coup of Van Horn Mosley. Nothing about the 1942 coup planned by von Syatsky and his Russian emigres, Russian Nazis. And nothing then about the poisoning, the assassination of Roosevelt between 1933 and 1945, which is some combination of the Russian woman painter and the British security coordination of Sir William Stevenson, the man called Intrepid. There's none of this. Rather, what we seem to have is a grudging acceptance of Roosevelt. The positive stuff seems to be transferred over to Wallace. The problem is Roosevelt was the guy who had to take responsibility for winning and make those compromises, because that's what it came down to. Remember, the U.S. government after June of 1940 was a coalition government with Republicans in the government, and this gets us to one of the grave weaknesses. This series attempts to rehabilitate Colonel Henry Stimson, General George Marshall, by extension, Robert Lovett and John J. McCloy. The Stimson-Marshall clique in the War Department is one of the main forces of evil. I will be showing in some months now the role that they had in bringing on Pearl Harbor. They are up to their necks in arranging Pearl Harbor. That is, arranging it as a U.S. defeat to weaken and embarrass Roosevelt. The concentration camp incarceration of the Japanese Americans is McCloy. The dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan is Stimson. Instead, this series seems to want to demonize General Leslie Groves. Sure, demonize him all you want, but he is working for Stimson. So the attempt to defend Stimson against McCulloch and other Truman biographers is grotesque. We don't need to defend these Wall Street figures. This gets us to the general question. Who is the enemy? What is wrong with American history? My answer is very clear. What's wrong with American history is the City of London and Wall Street. That's the enemy. This clarity is sadly lacking in this series. It's just not there. And therefore we're left with, I don't know, problems. What do we conclude, really? What is the problem? Is the problem the American people? Is it human nature? Is it man's fate? Is it the Republican Party? What is it? It's the financiers. And again, it's simple. Fight bankers. If you're not fighting bankers, you're spinning your wheels. And that goes, you can project that back a long, long way. So Stimson and the imps of Satan, these are bad people. Another methodological problem. Is the U.S. presidency really a powerful office, or is the president usually a puppet? Let's take the case that occupies much of this series. Harry S. Truman. This is a puppet. He is one of the best documented puppets that we have. We have Clark Clifford telling us how Truman was manipulated, run on domestic policy, and between Dean Acheson especially and Averell Harriman, we learn how Truman was run in terms of international policy. It is not enough to blame this on Truman and then Jimmy Burns of South Carolina. You've also got to look at the control mechanisms, right? The Pendergast indictability of Truman, his past in the Ku Klux Klan. Somehow that doesn't come out. So Truman cannot be seen as an independent force. He is definitely a creature of these Wall Street forces, which this series is determined to defend. And the dropping of the atomic bomb, once again, is Stimson. He ran the project, and that is what Groves means when he says Truman just had to not interfere, and we went ahead and did it. Anti-Americanism, up to a point, fine. For the right reasons, it's okay. You need it. But what about when the United States does something good? For example, MacArthur in Japan. This is a tremendous step forward in history. The introduction of a land reform, the introduction of trade unions, the rights of women, the abolition of the House of Lords, the abolition of titled nobility, the renunciation of war as an instrument of policy. None of that seems to get involved. Roosevelt as the anti-fascist par excellence, attacking the Nazi dictator and fascism in the quarantine speech of Chicago, 1938. Not worth talking about. When Eisenhower blocks the British, the French, and the Israelis in the Suez Crisis of 1956, doesn't get in. How about Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program? The Soviets, of course, had the human sacrifices. It's really a matter of the Red Army and U.S. production. That's pretty much what won the war. So the honor, of course, goes to the Red Army and their human losses. But the Lend-Lease was indispensable, as the Soviets more or less admitted. So this doesn't get mentioned. We also have to remember that the Comintern policy of the 1920s, the so-called third period, the social fascist theory, was instrumental in bringing Hitler to power. Stalin had this theory of Hitler as the Ledokol, the icebreaker of the revolution, and seemed to welcome his seizure of power. Later on, there was the Hitler-Stalin pact, but that, just like so many others, seems to be something you have to just sweep under the rug. The Atoms for Peace program by Eisenhower. The Atoms for Peace by Eisenhower is the way to world economic development, but our authors don't like it because it leads to nuclear proliferation. So those are some of the points. There's also the unfortunate fact that the series gives up on the Kennedy assassination and 9/11, the establishment official version of the Kennedy assassination and September 11th, 2001 is accepted. And I'm afraid what we're left with is some left liberals who don't have the guts to tell you who actually did these things, and therefore we fall back on some kind of collective guilt of the American people. Well, here we reject collective guilt, not for Germany, not for the U.S., not for anybody. It's wrong, and we'll see you again next week on World Crisis Radio.